exciting resources to pep up your secondary history lessons? Well, here on Resource Review, we're evaluating 3 that might interest you. They are a website with a mix of historical activities and resources.
Here's Harold with his army, and here is the Norman army.
A website for pupils to create historical newspapers. And an online exhibition of Second World War art. Find out what our panel of experts think here on Resource Review. Joining me to recommend today's resources is history teacher and author Ben Walsh. On the panel today we have Colin Hinson. Colin is a freelance educational writer. And we also have history teacher and deputy head of Allerton High, Heather Scott. Heather is chair of the secondary committee of the Historical Association. Welcome to you all. Thanks very much for coming. So, Ben, let's look at your first resource, which is a website called Burnt Cakes. But this is a website with a difference, as I understand it. Can you explain it to us?
It is very simply a collection of good ideas, interesting resources, some of which you pay for, some of which are free. It also contains reviews. It's really aimed at a community of teachers who visit it on a regular basis, and I think that's how you get the best use out of it.
And what is it about it that you particularly like?
I think I actually like the quirky and random nature of it. The fact is that if you want to see a review of a new textbook, for instance, by another teacher, there's a pretty good chance you'll find a review there for the sort of daily grind, if you like, as well.
OK. We visited Alderman Blackshill School in Colchester, where teacher Michael Firth had opted to try one of the packages that you can buy from Burnt Cakes.
That is going to change the course of history in this country. The resource I was using today seemed to fit in well with what we're doing at the present time, which was teaching about the Norman Conquest. This afternoon's lesson is about bias in history. So what do we know about bias? Anybody? The website is called Burnt Cakes, and we found it on the internet. My colleague and I went through it, looked at it, and they got things available for Key Stage 3. And it was used basically as a means of refreshing their memory. We had gone through the run-up to the Battle of Hastings before, and we could then go on to look at the main exercise, which was the bias. The pupils had a worksheet which they filled in what happened during each hour from either an English or Norman viewpoint to show how each side would have recorded this. You're going to be Normans or you're going to be English? Some people would say Saxons, but we'll use the term. It didn't give too much information. It allowed them to draw on what they'd learnt before, and it also allowed them to put their own ideas in, their own opinions of how things were going. Try to use strong adjectives such as mighty, heroic, masterful. Turn your opinions, your ideas into... The pupils did like it. They were talking about it afterwards, which I think is a very good sign. This resource does fit in with the new curriculum, and we will look at it again as a department.
Well, Ben, in the clip there we saw just one package that's available from Burnt Cakes in use. How well does that reflect the quality of the site overall, do you think?
And I actually think it reflects it very well. There are resources to purchase and there are free resources as well. What Burnt Cakes is really pushing is what we refer to as CPD, continuing professional development. You know, we're talking about a resource that actually makes a teacher who's already good even better.
Well, Heather, is this the holy grail of history resources?
I think it's a fantastic mix. I really like the way that it's an eclectic mix of loads of different things. And as Ben said right at the beginning, it's not in particular categories. So I think the key for using it in the classroom is to keep visiting the website and see what's there, because there are so many new things all the time.
Colin, how easy do you think it is for teachers to keep coming back to a resource, finding new things on it? I mean, is it user-friendly enough for them?
Yeah, well, I found it fairly easy to navigate, yes. And the things I liked about this, with the resources that are available on there, a lot of them are available, downloadable as Word documents or PowerPoint. Now, that's a good thing, because it means that the teacher can then personalise those particular resources, and for that I thought this was a good resource.
So it sounds like it has a lot of flexibility, which
Definitely.
is one of its strengths.
Yeah.
And who really is going to get the most out of this?
I think it's the teacher who is looking for some extra ideas, a little bit of an edge, something to change the way something is taught, perhaps just trying out something new. And above all, somebody who's going to devote the energy to visiting it regularly.
OK, well, thank you all very much. Now let's move on to Ben's second choice of resource. And you could describe this as a bit of a headline grabber. It's another website. Can you describe it to us?
Well, it's called Headline History, and it's produced from a government initiative, the Culture Online. We have essentially a newsroom simulation. It's a resource designed to help students to produce a newspaper article or front page based around different historical situations in different time periods. It's very visual, it's very animated, there are lots of friendly faces that keep popping up, there's lots of audio in there as well as visual material, and there's quite a good structure and framework to allow students to actually put together this news report.
Well, let's go now to our reporter at Mill Hill County School, history teacher Ellie Dixon, and see if this resource is making headlines there.
The package I've been looking at is the Headline History website. It enables pupils to write news copy. It covers the Roman era, the Tudor era, the Victorian era and World War II.
Hello there, I'm Florence Nightingale. You may know me as the lady with the lamp.
The main way students would access information, facts and opinions to put in an article is using the video playback interviews.
We are in a very different position.
And they're fantastic because you actually see historical characters coming to life on the screen, and all of that is based upon primary source material as well. They then use those interviews and shape quotes to build their own stories.
I'm Sir Francis Drake.
Ideally, I would use a package with students each having their own monitor and being able to work independently of the class. It could also be used, I think, using an interactive whiteboard, and I can see real scope for using the programme to develop an article as a whole class. It's absolutely excellent in terms of getting pupils to select relevant material and to actually work that material into their own piece of writing. Beyond that, it's a brilliant way of exposing students to bias in writing and interpretations of the past as well. It's quite difficult to navigate around. That can actually distract from the history. But I think with an orientation lesson, once you'd actually given pupils the chance to play around with it, I think they would be able to use it independently perfectly well.
One thing before we discuss with the panel, Ellie hinted that navigation wasn't particularly easy, and I felt that with these sort of heads popping up, the site didn't seem to take itself too seriously, and I wondered whether that was really appropriate for secondary history.
It's a weakness in the navigation issue, I think. That it is a little bit too busy in many respects. Having said that, it's not coming from a strictly educational stable, and I think that one of the aims lying behind it from Culture Online was that students might actually play about with this in their own time at home as well.
Well, panel, what do you think? Colin first.
I really enjoyed playing with this. I mean, when I first came to it, the instant thought that popped into my head was, this is Key Stage 2. And it follows the scheme of work for Key Stage 2. But then I sort of got beyond that, if you like, and decided that wasn't much of a problem, because for me, with Key Stage 3 pupils, what this is really good for is historical skills. You know, it's not so much to do with the content, but actually what you do with the content. And so, you know, I felt that it was a really, really useful resource in the secondary classroom. The other thing I really liked about it was that it involved many pupils in the creation of that newspaper. So you had an editor and a senior reporter, a picture researcher. Everyone took on a different role, and that means that nobody is excluded. And I thought that was a great thing about this resource.
Positive review from Colin there. Heather, what about you?
I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. Like Colin, I thought, well, this is Key Stage 2, but I think there's huge crossover for Key Stage 3, and take Ben's point, I used it with older groups. I think it's exactly the right sort of resource. I do think the navigation was difficult, though. I think you'd have to spend, particularly if you were using it at Key Stage 2, you'd have to spend some time on training the students as to how to use the technology. And given that the Key Stage 2 history is so restricted in time, that there might not be...
that's a bit of a drawback. So you definitely all like the way the resource works. Is the content really well researched? Can you rely on all of the kind of personal testimonies? Are they correct historically?
I certainly didn't find anything that had me sort of screaming and shouting. They're not... I suppose if you wanted to quibble, you could suggest that they are presented as though they are genuine historical sort of sources, but in fact, in most cases, they're not, although the archive film obviously is.
Well, I'm afraid we have to move on now to our third resource for the day. And Ben, this sounds like a bit of a hidden gem. What is this resource?
It's one of the exhibitions that lurks within the website of the National Archives, formerly the Public Record Office. Right. And here we have a fantastic collection of material from the Ministry of Information. Perhaps because we're British, we didn't call it the Ministry of Propaganda. The exhibition is called The Art of War. And it's called The Art of War because it's largely cartoon and similar sort of imagery designed to sort of perform particular purposes to support the war effort. There's also a film archive in there as well, including the delightful More Eggs, which involves a talking chicken. And I think I'll say no more about that, just to intrigue the watcher to try and go and investigate it for themselves.
Go and see what Ben's talking about. But did you like this resource, Heather?
I did, yes. When I first went to it, it's something I hadn't come across before, and I spent a lot of time on websites, but I hadn't found it, and I thought it was fascinating the way you could go into the Valour page and you could go in and find out why people had won medals for what particular act of bravery, and I think I could see that in a classroom, that you could then say, right, go and divide into groups of 3 and go and research this, tell me why this person won this medal, come back and tell us.
Colin, what caught your eye about this resource?
The thing that I really liked about it was that, again, this is a resource that can be used with historical skills. Again, it's less to do with content and more to do with skills. It is propaganda, after all, although it's not actually portrayed as that. It's the Ministry of Information, as you said, which is an interesting choice of words that should be picked up by the teacher anyway when discussing this kind of thing.
Again, it wasn't specifically designed for teachers, it's very much for the general public, but clearly it's a potential goldmine for teachers. Great. The other thing is, because it all belongs to the National Archives, it is, within reason, free to use in any way you see fit.
Right.
And I think you also have the other added advantage that we have, for most of the images there, we have really quite a good provenance. And one of the things I find interesting is that some of these were draft materials that were never published. Wow. Didn't make it past the sort of the approval process. Now that, for me, is a ready-made activity. You know, you can say to your students, okay, here are 4 or 5 of these things. Shall we approve them? You be the censor.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But just to recap, the 3 resources that we looked at are the Burnt Cakes website from Burnt Cakes, Headline History from Northcliffe Electronic Publishing Limited, and finally, The Art of War from the National Archives. For more information about all of the resources that we've talked about today, go to our website. It's teachers.tv/resource review. Or if you want to, email us, resourcereview@teachers.tv. A very big thank you to our panel, to Ben, to Heather and to Colin. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Resource Review. Bye-bye.